I am privileged and honored to be the moderator for this session, the panel of my illustrious colleagues here. And today we're talking, following Jeff's presentation, a little bit about cultivating dynamic innovation ecosystems. I think I'll have to get up because I have my, just to push the slides. So when we talk about innovation ecosystems, we're talking about a real live entity for what moves innovation or what's expected to move innovation in our country. There's several different ways of looking at it, and the first slide up there looks at Bill Olet from MIT, talked about the innovation ecosystem, and Jeff alluded to it earlier with government, business, universities, the giant ecosystem moving. Josanne spoke a little bit as well about Judy Estrin's book, Closing the Innovation Gap. And Judy Estrin talked about multiple ecosystems working, so that you have the universities, and I'm in academia, and I think it's very important, but we're not the only part of the system that has to work. Business and government has to come into play. And Judy talks about those three wheels, as it were, operating together. A different way of looking at it, Peter Cleveland, who's a vice president at Intel, a little bit tongue-in-cheek, talked about governments trying to push this innovation ecosystem, thinking of it linearly, the academic approach, research, development, and commercialization. And what he was suggesting is that it's a collaborative model. All of the pieces need to work together. How do we get all of the pieces working together? Well, ICT forms the base, I think, the foundation for leveraging technology to move the innovation ecosystem. And Lin in 2004 moved it global and started talking about clusters of innovation superseded by this technology platform and the technology framework that would move and allow innovation to happen. Just a couple weeks ago, UTT hosted a symposium on innovation and entrepreneurship, looking at the triple helix model, government, business, academia working together. Professor Horowitz from Stanford talks about a quadruple helix now, and not just government and business and academia working together, but you have civil society coming into play as well, social enterprises. So here on this one, we have the International Collaboration Framework. And I've put up on the, for you, two booklets that were just produced by one of the EU-funded projects that we're working with at the university, looking at innovation needs in the Caribbean. This collaboration of the knowledge system and the regional knowledge network, for it to work, what needs to be in place? And we evaluated, we questioned about 500 firms and research institutions across the Caribbean. And one of the big things they talked about that was missing, that we need to work on, and I'm hoping my colleagues will just mention a little bit as we go through the session, was the networks. Academia is not talking to business sufficiently. Government and academia and business not working together. And almost to a fault, each part of the system identified an issue of trust, and for trusted networks to be able to move the system. This morning, my four colleagues are going to speak about the big picture, innovation systems. Mr. Lewis is going to talk about, he's from the Council for Innovation and Competitiveness, and will tell us a little bit about what's being put in place right now at the Council for Trinidad and Tobago. Followed right along by Professor Bhattacharya, who will talk about the human capital and the importance of culture. How do we really create a culture of innovation? How do we forgive failure? How do we move from forgiving failure to celebrating failure? How does a university work with business and in a timely fashion be responsible and flexible and attempt to create a culture of innovation and entrepreneurship on our campuses? So Professor Bhattacharya has a big job there for us and will tell us a little bit about what's happening and what it takes to move that agenda in Trinidad. And then Dr. Malyale will talk about the innovation ecosystems that keep on giving and some of her work there and what we can do together to create those networks. And then Dr. the Honorable Votawari will tell us from a national point of view what's happening. So without much further ado, I'm going to give over to my colleagues. We each are going to be speaking for 10 minutes, 5 minutes, and then we'll close up in 2 minutes, and we'll move along. I'm going to ask you, please, we have wonderful notepads. So take notes as each speaker presents, and then at the end of the fourth presentation, we'll entertain questions and have a wonderful discussion going. I'm excited and looking forward to our first speaker, Mr. Lewis. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I have 10 minutes. I have 8 slides, 3 minutes, in which I want to introduce the council and the work we do. Following that, I would like to describe a little bit of some of the preliminary work we're doing in starting to develop the National Innovation System and the policy to come from that. Let me be very cautious. We've only ever had our second meeting, so that it's still very early days. All right, as we go. And there should be a slide up, shouldn't there?
The arrow.
Never mind. In a couple of minutes, let me just tell you about the council. The council was started about a year and a half ago. The minister was our first chairman before he was moved to head the Ministry of Planning and now Sustainable Development. The very early job of the council was there were 5 items on our work program. Anybody familiar with where we are in terms of our international competitiveness ranking? Yeah, it's real bad. We are right now at number 84 of 144 countries. Job of the council is to figure out how to move that up at least 20 points in the next 2 years. Exports. Right now, non-oil exports account for somewhere between 8 or 10%, depending on the year you look at, in terms of our national exports. The dream is to double that and to figure out how to do that in the shortest possible time. So we get to 15, 16%. RDI expenditure, research and development and innovation expenditure. Right now, we don't know what it is. You read various reports and they tell you it's 0.0023% of GDP. In truth and in fact, while the number is accurate, it's misleading. We don't know because companies don't track it. Many years ago in the metropole, more than 60 years ago, companies by law and with the provision of tax breaks started to track their research, development, and innovation expenditure. We do not do that. So it means that companies, your companies, right now invest in research, development, and innovation, and it goes straight through to the general ledger. It does not get pulled out. So that as a nation, we don't know what it is. And essentially, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So our task is to try to figure out how to get it measured. The third thing is to help existing firms become more competitive and export ready, which flows from the first 2 missions. From that, to raise the national awareness of innovation. And as of October this year, we were assigned by the minister responsibility for developing recommendations for the National Innovation Strategy and Policy. The council, its sister council, is the Economic Development Board. We share secretariat, we report in to the minister, and our recommendations go through to him, to the cabinet. And that is very briefly what we do, what we're about, and what we're trying to do. Let me switch to speaking a little bit about the National Innovation System and Policy. As I said, we've only had our second meeting on it, And our first task that we set was to develop our work program. And one of the first things that we had to do, and I'm sure this is very familiar to most of you, is to define what we mean by innovation. Ask any number of academics and you get triple the number of definitions for it. But the core is, if you don't know what you're dealing with, then you can't develop it. So first was developing an understanding of what innovation is, and our working definition right now are processes that generate or cause the generation, acquisition, and application of knowledge for economically and socially beneficial purposes. One of the critical things in that definition is that it does not speak about invention. We are very clear that innovation and invention, like a relay race, innovation takes up where invention leaves off. So that NIHRS will be developing a national science and technology policy. I'm sure that will have tremendous focus on stimulating inventions. Our task is, how do you take that in a very practical, beneficial way and make it economically useful and societally useful? Our second task was to ask ourselves, what does good policy look like? And I challenge you. If you look at Trinidad and Tobago, and successive governments have had multiple policies, which policies do you think have worked? And quite frankly, which policies we can vaguely remember, if at all? Two that stood out for us is our national education policy, first shaped 50 years ago. And while successive governments have tweaked and changed it, the policy has survived and been nurtured by successive governments of very different political stripes.
Hello.
The second, a policy of probably about 25 to 30 years old, is our policy of monetization of our gas resources. That policy, introduced in the early 90s, has survived successive governments. So for us, the question we're asking ourselves is, how do you develop an innovation policy and the system that supports that, that will survive the ups and downs of the politics of a country? And because an innovation policy will probably take 10 or more years before it really starts to have bite and impact. Out of that, because the tendency is to look internationally at what others do, we challenged ourselves to ask, what innovations could we point to in our own country for which Trinidadians were responsible and we developed? Let me give you a couple seconds. If I had to ask you to identify policies in this country that were innovative, what would you come up with? Here's a short list. The Industrial Court of Trinidad and Tobago, the first court of its type that successfully reduced strikes and work stoppages and has since been copied by a number of countries. The floating of the Trinidad and Tobago dollar in 1993, a massive innovation. The World Bank and the IMF said it could not be done. All of the economic and theories at the time suggested that simply was not possible. And 3 minutes. But we did it with a managed float, which is now copied worldwide. Our interreligious organization that dates back many, many years and was one of the first ecumenical councils of its type. More recently, all-inclusive fetes, carnival bans. No, don't laugh at the wee-wee truck. The economic impact of carnival and carnival bans is massive. And one would certainly identify a significant innovation, our taxi transportation system, owned by over 25,000 entrepreneurs, not funded with taxpayers' dollars, successfully moving every day hundreds of thousands of people. Yes, I know we may have things to say about taxi drivers, but the system itself does work. Our task is to identify what would cause such things to happen. What kind of policy and what kind of strategy would you need to encourage innovation and innovation with economic benefits to our country? That's the work of the Council, and hopefully I'll be reporting back to you sometime in the not too distant future on what we think would be useful and necessary to move our country forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And Professor Bhattacharya.
Good morning. Good morning. In the interest of, I think, the time, I will skip a few slides which is there so that, concentrate more on those issues which are very critical, I think, for this country, to take innovation forward. This thing,
Frank, do you have the...
Sorry?
Oh, it's on the podium, yeah.
Oh, it's here? No?
No, to the left, on the top.
Oh,
Yes.
okay. Sorry. Thanks. Okay. Just quickly, I think to again repeat certain things which even Jeff has discussed in his topic also. I think the enormity of the change which we are observing these days, particularly in terms of amount of information every moment we are generating, that is creating a problem which is unparalleled, which cannot be compared with any other previous time. And that's basically, we think, I think that many of the organizations are in a mess because this kind of quantity of information is making many organizations very difficult to survive, and nowhere this is more visible than in the education industry. And education industry today is in a real mess. And I think if you remember the one late organization scholar, Russell Ackoff, he was telling that managers don't solve simple problem, they manage mess. And I think in the education industry today, you see, if you think the way we are actually today, we are teaching even the students in the schools. Every day, amount of information on every area is adding up, but what is happening? We are not discarding things. So the weight of the school bag is increasing. So part of the school job is transferred to the parents. Parents have to teach. Then the tutorial classes outside the schools, because the schools are unable to discard material which is already obsolete and incorporate new things. So basically we are incorporating more and more things, and we are asking them to learn in same 24 hours of time 10 times more information today than which probably they used to do about 2 or 3 years back. And even if some of you remember, there was a Sony video which was shown in 2009 by Sony Corporation to its shareholders, where they're mentioning that in 2009, that a student of a technological course today, what he learns in the first year, by the time the student comes to third year, 50% is obsolete. And actually last year, there is a very interesting article written by the director and associate director of MIT Center for Digital Business. And actually, even I think if we read that, find that even Sony's kind of projection is quite outdated. So I think in this situation, are we innovating? I mean, we are talking about human capital, but the institutions which are creating this human capital, are they innovating? Probably management education certainly is in a mess today. The management education is mismanaged so grossly that today in my own country, in India, this year alone, about 250 business schools have been closed down. And the prediction is that in another couple of 2-3 years, another 300-400 would be closed. And top business schools are also now getting nervous. So how to deal with that situation? I think we need to innovate here also. I mean, the way we teach. If we are talking about knowledge economy, where knowledge is the basic input in every industry would require, then how come we are getting people in one class, and every day we are asking them to come to a class from, for a particular time, and then at the end of, say, 1 or 2 years, we are evaluating the way we think it is to be evaluated and give them degree. But doesn't it sound very ridiculous in today's world? I mean, why we are asking people to come every day at a particular time to the class where there is tremendous scarcity of time. Time is in shortage. I mean, if you add more condition to the time, you make that time is more expensive. So today, actually a student, what he or she pays for tuition, that is insignificant if you consider the hidden cost of the time. I mean, the time is scarce, and I mean, they are coming all the time. Then you add the faculty time. Faculty is also asked to come a particular time, than the support services. So I think the cost is so exorbitant, particularly for a small country like, say, Trinidad and Tobago. I think this is absolutely unbearable. But even no country can bear this kind of cost of education. But we are not innovating. We are actually, probably the time has come that we ask that, okay, if it is a knowledge industry, so everybody is trying to get some knowledge which is going to the industry as an actual input, then your model should be that it's fixed performance. Everybody has to get only A+, because when you are running an industry, you want the best input. You don't compromise there. So same with knowledge industry. If the person is coming to get that knowledge, it has to be only A+. I mean, you cannot really divide into different grades, but let the time be variable, because everyone can get that knowledge in different time. So it's fixed performance, variable time model. But if we talk about that, then 4 minutes left. So that would require probably a huge kind of system change. For that, I think I basically worked on a model. I thought that this maybe, in a way also explains innovation quite well, that technological factors are that one set of factors. But what I'll be talking about the social factors, because together together these two factors provide innovative solution to a customer's problem. Okay, so coming to that, I state coming to in the social factors. I think that developing peoples and skills, which was actually was to be the focus of my this brief address here. So I think that how you develop skills, particularly say in the educational institution, how we teach people, and there has to be some kind of mix between convergent thinking and divergent thinking. I mean, the way probably you see the students, they think, or the way we teach, it's all deductive method. That okay, it's very logical, mathematical, model driven. But here, I think in today's world, what's happening that every company has to figure out what is their, what are their strengths. So suppose even if you take a small product like, say, household sponge, which you use in kitchen, that's people who are manufacturing the sponge, they are good on certain attributes. Say they know, what is the on what depends the porosity of the material, the colors. You can divide. You can figure out various attributes of that product. Now, your divergent thinking will tell that in what kind of industry some of those attributes would be required. So you figure out, various other areas of applications where, you have knowledge. So it's basically what we call attribute domain matrix, that what are the attributes which will be applicable to another domain. And then combining together, you can come up with some innovative solutions. Say, okay, if the manufacturer of bottled water, probably, right now, they are providing by offering the bottled water, they're offering you a solution. When you're thirsty, to keep yourself hydrated, the drinking water is the solution. But maybe there are better solutions to keep yourself hydrated. I mean, so I think that would require a very different kind of thinking, and that's what in the universities and the schools we got to teach people, that how to develop that divergent and convergent thinking, and then how to obviously measure people's progress, the students' progress in that. And I think these are quite well known, some of the possible mechanisms, how you develop this kind of thinking. I think that also requires a lot of innovation in the organization. I think some of these things cannot be actually implemented in a traditional organizational form. I think we require some kind of organizational innovations. Otherwise, this type of things cannot be practiced. Say, the Morning Star is a very good example. I mean, recently in one issue of Harvard Business Review, Gary Hamel was describing about this company. A company of 400 employees without any managers is the most profitable tomato ketchup company in US today. It's tomato ketchup companies' average profitability is 1%. This company for last 20 years, double-digit growth without any managers. So that means this is a very different kind of organization where you have to function in a very different way, and this is called organization innovation. Innovation does not always mean some coming up with product or some services. Sometimes even by doing organizational innovation, you can one can offer miracle there. And lastly, I think the culture and values. I think this requires some kind of value system or culture we have to create. One is that the last one, which I think is quite critical, particularly even in countries like here, questioning the hippo syndrome, highest paid person's opinion syndrome. I think this requires a very open culture, because this kind of in this kind of a system, when you try to pick everyone's brain, so you cannot probably create a lot of barriers to free thinking, free flow of ideas, where one has to experiment with very kind of crazy thinking, crazy ideas. So how you do that, and how then you develop matrices to measure those experiments' progress, and then later probably pick up one or two, measure this kind of projects, and take the company to a very new level. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Bhattacharya. So organizations themselves need to be organized to support innovation and creating people who are innovative. And now we hear from Dr. Malalieu. Thank you.
Morning. Can you hear me? Pleasure to be here. Oh, here we go. Right. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to share my thoughts on innovation ecosystems that keep on giving. I've never talked for 10 minutes before, but I think I'm up for the challenge. So let's see if I can do it. So the reason we're all here today actually is in my mind, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but not now, not in my 10 minutes. The reason we're here today is really to contemplate the end game, and the end game is very simply this. It is to enhance the social, economic, and cultural development of our people, and that's it. And there are many ways of doing that. And if I were to ask each of you in this room, you can give me seven answers right now in my 10 minutes. I'm not going to ask you, of course. But the real question then is not what can we do, but is who pays for it. Okay. So Denise, thank you very much for the preamble showing the slide. So there's a lot of attention placed in this area of innovation systems, because innovation systems are seen to be the wealth-generating engines, yes? And if you ask anybody in the room, you're all going to say the same thing, that innovation systems, of course, comprise research or skills and entrepreneurs, all this innovation ecosystem. In fact, eTech on their website I see that they actually define ecosystems, and they say that it comprises this network of organizations, blah, 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 and the key institutions, universities, R&D centers, public and private sector, et cetera, et cetera. My take on it is entirely different. I understand, though, the merit of this. I understand that there can be a very small portion of the society that's engaged in this ecosystem, and I understand that you can have benefits that accrue to the rest of society through, for example, the trickle-down effect. And also you can, through philanthropy and through corporate responsibility, you can actually funnel large chunks of the wealth generated in these very closed ecosystems into the rest of society. I think that you can do more. I understand also that the government, Minister Chibari, I'm happy to see you today. I understand that the government in its 2013 budget has laid out a number of strategies for improving the competitiveness of business. You can see some of them here, and also in stimulating innovation, you can see some of them. And you see, in the meantime, and at the same time, there are strategies to look at these social development issues. I think you can do more. I personally believe that there is an optimum operating point, and that optimum operating point is defined by the intersection of these three initiatives. Because I only have 10 minutes, you will forgive me, of course, for pretending to separate business from innovation. I don't mean to, but I'm sure that you will allow me to do so for the purpose of the presentation. Let's look at this optimum point. There are many companies around the world, and I'm sure you know of them, that have been able to operate here, right, at this optimum operating point. For example, Walmart, they lowered their carbon emissions, and they also saved $200 million by reducing the packaging of their goods and also reducing the delivery routes. Johnson & Johnson, excuse me, improved employee health and saved $250 million by implementing employee wellness programs. Yeah? And there are many other examples of this creating shared value proposition. Examples include Nestle, GE, the intercontinental hotel chains. Excuse me. These companies were able to do this, operate at that optimum point, that sweet spot, by doing the following. By achieving competitive business advantage with, of course, tangible and realizable profit gains, just for emphasis, through innovation. Of course, we all know that. We've been talking about it for 20 years. But they have done so through innovations that yield social development outcomes. This is completely different, foundationally, fundamentally, transformationally different from corporate social responsibility. It really is completely different. And this is not to say that these companies, while practicing shared value, don't, of course, also practice corporate social responsibility. But this is fundamentally different. It is fundamentally different because it is these social development outcomes that are intrinsically part of the economic gain strategy or the profit-bearing strategy. So, fundamentally, in this proposition of shared value, how much time do I have, Denise? 4 minutes. Oh my goodness gracious. Fundamentally, intrinsic in this strategy is to identify those social development outcomes that align either with the core business or with the capabilities or in some way align with the business. And that alignment can result in economic gains. If not, we will continue to be patronized by business who give us money for the social development outcomes in a patronizing way. So this strategy is really to make the social development outcomes intrinsic to the profit-bearing strategy. Numbers. Let's look at Trinidad. I feel that one of the areas of greatest opportunity because of its multi-ordered and multi-dimensional aspects is the area of exclusion. In Trinidad and Tobago right now, ALTA and UE independently have estimated that there are 22%, not 1 or 2%, but 22% of our population that are functionally illiterate, which of course includes those who are entirely illiterate. Also, you know the numbers, 16.7, 17% of our population are poor, living below the poverty line. The disabled, which I have a particular interest in, and there's a broad spectrum of disabled, I say disabled because it fits better on the slide than differently abled, is estimated at a high of 10% and at a low of 4%. We also have a portion of our population living in prisons, right? That's on the order of 0.3%. So all of these, if you use one of the extreme examples, let's say to be most optimistic, let's say that all the illiterate people are poor, you actually end up with a total possible ecosystem, if you exclude all of these as you do, 75% of the population. Many years ago, well, a couple of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, my team and I at the University of the West Indies sought to understand the opportunities that exist inside of that 25% of population that are, for one reason or another, excluded. At the most pessimistic end, as I showed you in the previous slide, almost 50%. Is that my time up? Somebody knocking? Ready for me to go? So our team did a number of things that were very new, I think, very innovative, and we did so in an innovative way. And the innovative way that we did it was that we used what we had, and we used what we had with great nimbleness and versatility. We did it, and we did it now. We looked at as an example, focal point, we used the small-scale fisheries industry for many reasons. Low income, suffering severe social exclusion. One of the areas that the government of Trinidad and Tobago had identified as an area of potential significant growth, and a number of other reasons. But one very important reason is that fishermen who are inside of this ecosystem sit at the bottom of a value chain. And at the bottom of that value chain, experience tremendous operational inefficiencies. So we're not just talking about the levels of illiteracy, right? We are talking about other things that have to do with earning a livelihood. At the same time, I was engaged in many conversations, 3 independent parallel conversations were in a sort of application space, which is DLS, Distance Learning Secretariat, a sort of research interest, Save the World space, IDRC, and very much an operational technical space, MIT. Moving right along, Denise, you're happy to know that we built very rapidly, with great nimbleness, an entire ecosystem, a network of agencies in Trinidad and outside of Trinidad with intersecting interests and complementary capacities, right? I wish I had time to go through all this. It's extremely interesting. But we did it, as I say, because we had to, and because we could, and because while everybody else was talking about it, we were simply doing it. We got a tremendous amount of interest around the world, from all over the world. I've seen some of the countries for the first time who have contacted us with interest in March, while they marched in the Olympics. Right, so there was I'd love to chat about that, but I know my time is just wrapping up now. So what we've done, aside from the innovation of building a mobile application suite, which quite frankly anybody can do, what we've done is we've looked at this experience as a focal point for gaining insights for all of us in this room, to understand how we can implement shared value systems. Shared value systems that extend beyond the tradition of an innovation ecosystem. Shared value systems that extend beyond the 75 or 51% of those of us who are privileged to not live with one or other factors that exclude us from the rest of the population. So our framework looks like this. It articulates at the very base, at the entry point, the development of instrumental competencies Fisherfolk, for example, learning how to use the physical devices. Is my time up? 30 seconds. So fishermen, for example, learning how to use the device as an instrument. And at the same time, of course, there's a new market for devices, for people who never bought those devices before. So there are profit gains for the business. And also, if I had time, I would talk to you about all of the other engagements that level of entry is characterized by. Very, very interesting. Hugely important to business, and of course, hugely important to social development. At the next level is informational competence. So these people who had been excluded from the whole conversation about information could be included. It's a strategy, it takes time, it's not instantaneous. It is not KFC. At the same time, there's a new market now for services and all of the other engagements, okay? One level up, it's a tiered model, T-I-E-R-E-D, tiered model. One level up is what we refer to as socio-technical competence. Socio being the key word. Because at that level, these previously excluded individuals are now able to engage in networks, not just devices and services, but engage in networks that make them productive, that make profound impact on the whole of the ecosystem and at the height. Those who propagate up to this level achieve a level of what we call strategic competence. And they actually are absorbed, like you and me, right here in this room, and will be the drivers and leaders of tomorrow. So there is a whole pathway. Right, so in closing very quickly, this framework can be used to apply all of the principles of shared value, and the opportunity costs of not doing this are simply too high. In closing, our current focus looks at all of that back and looks forward to researching measurement frameworks as design tools. So rather than only look at these indices, number 83 on the index, and 24th and 103rd, actually examine the measurements themselves as instruments to guide what we do. And not only what we do for 3 months down the road, what we do for 3 months down the road, but at the same time 18 months, and at the same time 5 years. Because we cannot have a conversation about the knowledge economy if we don't do that. Mm-hmm. And also, I'm very much interested, of course, because I'm an engineer, in the technical aspects of inclusive design. Thank you very much.
Wow. Thank you very much, Dr. Mallory. And I hope you took lots of notes, because I found that particular presentation quite provocative. So when Dr. Mallory tells us that the reality is that only a very small portion of our society will be engaged in this innovation system, as we call it, and the opportunity costs are just way too high for not engaging those that are intentionally or unintentionally excluded. I hope you have lots of questions for her. But we will hear now from our government, in one sense, business, academia, private sector, and the framework within which this entire innovation system has to operate. So without further ado, Dr. Tiwari, thank you very much. Oh, I'm sorry. I have an announcement. Questions can be texted to 7272. So as you're thinking of your questions, if you've written down your questions, please go ahead and text them to 7272. You can also tweet your questions to iGovTT. No, there's something in front of it. So questions can be, oh, it's there. So we're using technology in this session. Go ahead and text and tweet, and we'll come right back at the end of Dr. Tiwari's presentation. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Can you hear me? Is this on?
Yes, it's on.
Right. Okay. Good morning, everybody. Honorable Minister, all of my colleagues, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. When I got the brief for this, I was asked 3 questions, and I want to answer them very simply, very directly, and then go on to elaborate on a few items. The first thing I was asked is a platform being built to ensure innovation at the grassroots level? And the answer to that is no. We're not anywhere near there yet. And it is something that one has to keep oneself alert to. But to get a platform that would facilitate grassroots participation in the process of innovation is something that is very difficult given our configuration at the present time. Having said that, I want to say that sometimes grassroots people need no platform because their creativity and the necessity of survival creates its own climate for innovation. And therefore they generate their own platforms of creativity. The second question I was asked is, there were two parts to this. Are we focusing on human capital? The short answer is yes. If you look at our preschool strategy, percent participation. If you look at our primary strategy, which is 100% participation actually achieved. If you look at our secondary school participation, which is 100% actually achieved. And if you look at tertiary and technical vocational, which is now at 46.4, I think, participation actually achieved, you will say, yes, we are pursuing a human capital strategy. But I do want to say that in my estimation, there are challenges with what the human capital focus is on. I think we're far past the time when we could focus on sending people through the system who will then come out of the system and look for jobs. And therefore, the curriculum requirement to support an entrepreneurial and innovative culture is a critical factor at all levels of the system. And it is something that we need to address very pointedly. Are we thinking big enough? I am not sure. Some people might be. But I'm not sure as a nation we are thinking big enough about what is possible. Unless you think big, you cannot make big leaps, and you cannot achieve great things. And my own feeling is that there is need for opening up the thinking. Having answered those questions, the last question was vision of Trinidad and Tobago in terms of innovation and economic growth. And I want to say that we have a policy document which is 2011 to 2014, which is called Innovation for Lasting Prosperity. That derives out of our manifesto, the vision for which is prosperity for all. And in here, there are two fundamental assumptions. One is that in order to progress, innovation is critical. And the second one is that that only happens in a climate of democracy and inclusion. And I just want to read the vision and mission for you. The vision is that through creativity, innovation, and collaboration, we shall prosper together. And the mission is to achieve economic inclusiveness in an innovation-driven growth economy with greater equity, more meaningful participation, and a rising tide of prosperity for all in Trinidad and Tobago. And all of this is done within a sustainable development framework. But I want to say some things. I know I have just a few minutes, and I want to say those things in relation to words that I hope that you will remember. They are words that you know very well, and they are words that are very, very vital words. And I want to say something about those. The first thing is that innovation will thrive in a society in which critical thinking is respected. All right? And the reason I say critical thinking is because the critical thinker questions the world as it is and tries to think about what the alternative might be. And therefore, critical thinking is fundamental to the process of creativity and innovation. The second thing is that we need to appreciate that creative thinking is vital, and the nurturing of that is vital to facilitate the innovative process. And therefore, the curriculum and teaching methodologies in your system from early childhood to PhD are vital in that process, but they are absolutely critical in the primary and secondary level. And I want to say that in our secondary level, we lose about half of our students at the point of CSEC unless they get back into the system. And that is a reality that is statistically true. The other thing is that creativity, human creativity, comes from the human imagination. And unless you cultivate the human imagination as a matter of fundamental societal principle, believing in democracy and inclusion, and understanding that human capital is everything, then you're not likely to get the innovative culture that you really need to do the things that the world needs to have done in order to deal with 7 billion people in the world. In a small country like 1.3 million like Trinidad and Tobago, we need to think of how we can facilitate this process and excite it into multiple applications. The other thing is that creativity, critical thinking, etc. are not enough unless you could also cultivate the spirit of entrepreneurship. And by entrepreneurship, I do not mean business creation. That may be one end result. But the spirit of entrepreneurship which facilitates the individual to understand that after the thinking and the ideas and everything, something has to be done and somebody has to do it. And that spirit in the individual, the entrepreneurial disposition, is absolutely critical to the process of innovation. And I do want to say that collaboration is necessary, which is why we have it in there. In an individualistic society, innovation will not thrive. You need to have collaboration as a principle of organization. And therefore, the curriculum and the teaching methodology are also critical, so that in the transition from education establishment to the marketplace and to institutions, the collaborative culture also carries. You also need change in the existing institutions, whether public sector or private sector, to facilitate and foster the collaborative spirit. I don't know how many minutes I have, like 1 minute? How many? All right, I will just close. I will close by saying that in all of that, what we are looking at in terms of building and supporting an innovative culture, having said what I said, is that we are looking at the research system. We're looking at the applications of research system to the extent that we have it, and that is quite limited. We're looking at the connectivities that exist and the connectivities that are possible. And we're looking at how you get from these things to targeted action either in a business organization, in terms of business creation, that's just the creation of new business, and in terms of creating the context for larger, wider, innovative possibilities. And that means looking at something that Francis pointed to, which is to look at the innovations that already exist in the society and try to understand the context in which these things actually emerged. I want to say, for instance, if I could use just one example, the all-inclusive hotel package was created in Jamaica by, what's his name? By Butch Stewart, and became a worldwide phenomenon. That was a major innovation in the tourism industry. But it somehow, except for Stewart carrying on his own things, and you may say that the exclusive fete that Francis mentioned derives out of that concept. But it is something that never went further, and you never had any major new innovations in tourism coming out of the Caribbean, which is really where innovations in tourism should come from. So I mentioned that simply to say that we need to look at what we have done, but we also need to look at what we have, how they connect, what are the gaps, and see the extent that we can facilitate it. But never forget what I told you first, which is that it's all about the power of the human imagination. And unless we can understand the importance of democracy, inclusion, enlightened educational systems, and enlightened cultural structures within the institution in which we operate to facilitate that, we are not going to have the explosion of innovation that we need in order to make things happen at the level that we require, with the leap that we require, or at the pace that we require. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tawari. Equally provocative. So I hope there's some academic people there who will push back a little bit about the research systems, limited as they are or non-existent. The ecosystem needs to move, and hopefully we have some questions. You get a chance to push back on us, to comment, to question, to give and take a little bit on some of the very interesting presentations we've had. Thank you. Can you join me in thanking the panel again right now? So, Mr. Lewis looked at the big picture and how we needed to move Trinidad and Tobago from number 84 to number 64 in 2 years. So the next Innovation Conference, we'll be reporting back on what we've done there. Some of the things that needed to be put in place, policies in terms of education, in terms of innovation, the gas monetization policies. And then Professor Bhattacharya looked at some of the human capital issues, the possible mechanisms needed for moving our organizations, our educational institutions themselves, to be able to produce the kinds of innovative people through the education system itself. Organizations themselves must be organized. 8 people of innovation, entrepreneurship. And then Dr. Malalier, the numbers of people who are excluded from the innovation systems as constructed today, and things that the University of the West Indies and her team have been doing there, other people have been doing as well. And the questions about who pays for this. And it's not all enough for business and government and academia to get together. The 22% of functionally illiterate folk who are ALTA have identified, which kind of comes against what Dr. Tiwari mentioned, 100% participation in our primary school systems and our secondary school systems, yet the gap. How do we move it? What needs to happen? How can each of us, you and me and us together, collaborate to move this agenda forward? Your turn to ask, to comment, to suggest. I don't know if we have any questions that have been texted or tweeted, but there are 3 mics around the room, and we want to hear from you. If you could just identify yourself, name and where you're from, and then your comment, very short, comment or question, and then we move on. Thank you.
Hi, good day. My name is Jem Bleasdale. My name is Jem Bleasdale, and I work at iGovTT. Dr. Malalio commented on the marriage of social need with economic gain. However, within business, there's also a lot of needs that arise. And I hear a lot of people in Trinidad say, why reinvent the wheel? If it already exists foreign afield, let's just purchase a product. But then that product comes into our businesses, and it doesn't really apply to the Trinidadian culture as readily or as easily as we would like it to. And there's this terrible learning curve that isn't necessarily because of lack of intelligence, but it's because of a lack of the right culture that this product was designed to fit. Isn't there, therefore, an entire industry that we can build and create new products based on a need that arises, even if it does exist, but now tailor it using usability concepts and methods, tailor it to our culture and our environment? And doesn't it stand to reason, therefore, that because our environment is duplicated throughout the region and in other developing countries, that we can then market to these environments and businesses outside of our country even, or within our country, and then this should present an opportunity for businesses to expand what kind of business and what kind of service they provide and innovate in how we produce.
Okay.
Thank you.
Can we take one more question, and then I'll ask Dr. Mallory and whoever else to respond? Is there another question?
The Usaran Bisnat, Ministry of Planning and Sustainable Development.
Okay.
I really think we have a very successful innovation industry in Trinidad and Tobago, like this here, where we talk a lot, we have a lot of conferences, a lot of talk shops, but as someone said, somebody has to do it. And I think in this country, there's just too much talk, and we need to get down to doing it. Not only in ICT and in every sector of this country, I think we need to get down to do it. And I would hope that this symposium here should really address and focus on the Trinidad and Tobago situation. Google and digital and Oracle, fine. But I think we need to focus on the situation in Trinidad and Tobago, in our unique situation. I would like to see, we would like to see, we meaning the ICT people, that there are projects, that there are areas where we can focus and start doing something. For example, the software industry in Trinidad and Tobago. So I really do believe that we need to stop talking, which is very difficult in this country, and get down to somebody doing it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to take those two back to the panel. The first question is that there seems to be an entire industry that can be built, tailored to our particular situation, our environment, our needs, that could possibly be marketed abroad. And then the second comment, very similar, how can we get started in Trinidad and Tobago, focusing on our particular needs and the things that we can do? And first, Dr. Mallory, and then I'll open it up to anyone else on the panel to comment. Thank you.
Thanks, Denise. Yes, I would say my gut response, my reflex response is that from my experience and judgment, I highly favor looking at our particular strengths and looking at each circumstance on its own merit. So I believe that the greatest gains and the quickest gains can be realized just by doing and not talking. though there is a lot of merit in talking, but by doing. So in other words, if I were contemplating the design of a way forward, one of the first steps in that would be for companies who are experiencing problems to have those problems solved using a dynamic ecosystem that's built around them now, as opposed to putting down a new building and developing a whole innovation ecosystem in that building, just to the extreme. So in other words, to answer your question directly, I believe that there is a huge opportunity. If there is a company that has a problem that can be solved using technology, for example, that should spawn a lot of activity of itself, rather than go and look for a problem to solve. And there's many supporting details I can give for that, time permitting.
Thank you. Anybody else on the panel?
I would wonder if your question could not have a different premise. At the heart of the question is whether we're looking for radical innovation. Let me suggest to you that if we were to draw a continuum of radical innovation at one end and incremental innovation at the other, what % of innovation that turns out to be economically and society beneficial, where does it fall? The research tells us that somewhere between 93 to 95% of innovation is incremental. But the innovation that gets reported in the newspapers, conferences such as this, examples that speakers such as ourselves put up, tend to be that which is revolutionary. What your innovation ecosystem needs to do is to stimulate and accelerate incremental innovation. Technology is the door. Innovation is the decision to walk through that door. The culture will adapt. Cultures always have. What is needed? How comfortable are you? If you're comfortable, you're not going to move. So either there has to be the promise of great gain, or there has to be significant discomfort. Look at our own history. It was when Trinidad's stocks were really down in the late 80s and the 90s that we saw significant innovation. And when money flows and everybody's comfortable, everybody wants change that somebody else pays for, and the disruption must not affect you. It must touch somebody else. You want an innovation ecosystem and you want change. Be careful what you ask for, you might get it. But it comes out of a desire for very real change.
Thank you. Dr. Tawari?
Good point. I'd just like to mention that some work was done recently through Kariri involving a person who has been involved. He's from outside of Trinidad and Tobago, but he is involved in research on innovation, especially in industry in Trinidad and Tobago. And 31 companies were identified to participate on their readiness for innovation, their achievements in innovation, in things related to the whole culture of the place in terms of innovation. And that is the beginning of some work to try and understand what is possible in industry, and I think that kind of ties in with Kim's suggestion that if we have issues identified or problems identified that require solution, we can bring the ecosystem to bear on those rather than try to create a system in a lab somewhere or in an institution, in a new building somewhere. But I want to say something about the business of, we are, in this system, we are taught to, in the better part of the system, we are taught how to identify problems. And problem identification is a very important thing. And we are taught how to analyze and dissect the problem. And we are also taught how to posit or suggest solutions. But I think that there's a frame of mind that is required, especially in societies such as ours, that goes something like this, which is that assume that a problem emerges because a solution already exists. And the challenge is to match the solution which already exists with the problem that has emerged. And I feel that there is a frame for this kind of thinking that needs to filter through the system if we are to get anywhere in a constructive way. So I'm going back to the issue of thinking. The way we think determines how, at the end of the day, we behave. And how, at the end of the day, we address this issue of problem identification and solution, etc. And therefore, I think it is at the level of thinking first in the institutions that support and help to nurture the way we think that we need to make the most decisive kinds of interventions. Notwithstanding the fact that we also need to make them in existing industry, in existing institutions, etc. Because at the end of the day, tomorrow's world is really going to be in the hands of the solution finders, not the problem identifiers.
Thank you. Okay, I see some questions coming in. I don't know if I can read them. How can clustering aid in the social and economic development of Trinidad and Tobago? Can anyone say why investors are slow to back innovators and entrepreneurs in terms of venture capital? And then the downside to ICT and innovation is, I'll have to come closer to read it. But you can see it. Is there a downside to ICT and innovation? Is it worthwhile to pay some attention to the downside to avoid possible unforeseen outcomes of this drive? If we can keep that up, and we will take, I think somebody has a question. Oh, there are two mics. I see two hands raised. We'll take one of the questions now, and then I'll ask the panel to respond to all four. And then we'll take the next, depending on our timing. Joanne, you tell me who goes first? Okay. Mr. Phillip?
All right, yes. Good morning. Atiba Phillips, chairman at iGov, but not necessarily asking the question with that hat on this morning. It's a very interesting set of discussions and panels. I heard Mr. Kaplan talk this morning about Silicon Valley. I happen to go to school in Berkeley and be part of that.
I went to Stanford. I'm supposed to hiss, sorry.
Right, be part of that ecosystem along with Stanford and the other schools in the area, and seeing the interaction between students and business persons and you know, that general, the energy and the sharing happening there. And of course coming back to Trinidad and seeing something different. But one of the things I saw across in that space, I went to school with extremely bright, extremely fantastic folks, who then went on to work for Neutrogena or Clorox. And I was wondering, well, in my mind at the time, you're going to work for a bleach company. You are fantastic in terms of your abilities. And I reckon one of the challenges, therefore, is to match the brightest folks with the biggest problems. And what is the economic incentive framework to cause that to happen? And is that cultural? Is that one of the things that we're focusing on now, to try to get those persons who are really exceptional to deal with some of the hardest issues that we have.
Okay.
And then beyond that, to back those persons, the innovators, the entrepreneurs, the other persons, one of the issues that was raised in the Kaplan discussion was funding. But not only. the facilities that allow things to happen, including funding, but not only. And again, matching the funding and the facilitation and the support with those persons who are able to bring it to pass. Those are some of the issues. And just one more finally, in respect of research institutions, there's a lot of, I hear a lot of very good research going on. But the research, for example, in agriculture, the research for farmers may not get to the farmer. Or the output of the research, which is a big long document, the farmer cannot consume. So there needs to be a translation almost between what gets output from the research institution and how the end user can benefit from it.
Okay. All right, if we can get the 3 questions back up, and we'll add the 2 additional questions. How do we match the bright folk with the biggest problems? So how do we get, in other words, our educational institutions to choose to be relevant to the needs in their communities, in our communities? And then research institutions connecting. How do we have the producers of knowledge connect with the consumers of that knowledge? So I'm going to open it up to anyone on the panel to respond to the 5 questions. Thank you.
And I'm just here to remind you, moderator, that we're 5 minutes over on this panel, so that we would like to keep the contributions, the responses tight.
Very brief, very brief. Anyone wants to take a stab?
Well,
Dr. Tiwari.
The issue of producer and consumer, has been an ongoing problem, which is why I said that we need to look at the research, but also the applications. Because a lot of research gets done, it never goes anywhere. And we really now need to create whatever infrastructure is necessary. I know some of it is being done in agriculture, for instance, because of the food production strategy. But we also need to make those things work in other sectors, in other clusters as well. We've identified 7 clusters for development in terms of a diversification strategy, beginning with our strength in energy and then moving out into other areas, including finance, ICT, tourism, etc. And I think we need to build the ecosystem around each of these diversified pools, these pools for diversification. And I think that is something we can do very strategically. I think we could do it thoughtfully, and we could make it happen. It does not take a lot except a willingness to cooperate and collaborate and trying to get the various entities or the various people, also in institutions together. So that's one thing. The other issue of matching the brightest people to the biggest problems, in one way I understand the question, but I rebel against it because it spells of a kind of elitism. But I understand what is.
I heard a little chuckle there. Some people might find that interesting, you know. Thank you, Megan. At least somebody's laughing. Okay, folks, so we're going to resume the afternoon session, which is one that's going to be looking more at regional ICT policy and its importance in terms of regional development and ICTs as a catalyst for social and economic transformation. I know it's hard to come back in after lunch and to kind of sit, but I'm sure that you've had your coffee to give you a little caffeine fix, and if we'd be so good to get the people from outside to rejoin the room. This session is going to be chaired by the chairman of the e-Business Roundtable and CEO of Telios, that's Ronald Hines, and we're going to be joined via Skype by the Minister of State in the Ministry of Information Broadcasting and Telecommunications in Antigua and Barbuda, Dr. Edmund Mansour, and I think he's on standby ready to join us. Dr. Griffith, Minister Griffith is not unable to attend this session, and he's left a very good deputy, very good and able deputy in Atiba Phillips, who is the chairman of iGovTT. The Honorable Glenn Phillip, Minister of Information Technology from St. Kitts and Nevis, and Rehene Fraser, who is Secretary General of Canto. So I know we have to work a little harder at getting alert after lunch, but this should be a really good session because, of course, at the end of the day, all of this talk about innovation and investment, but this enabling environment, policy environment, and the role that government policies and institutions play in catalyzing this and incentivizing the sectors is really very crucial. And we trust that we're going to get some insights from our panel. So, Ronald, it's over to you.
Yeah, but I think I'll stand just to start because I think I'll be backing all of these people here who won't like me very much. They probably won't like me even if I stand, but I think I'll treat them a little better if I stand. So this session is Regional ICT Policy, a catalyst for social and economic transformation. So just to give you an idea what to expect and how to listen, I'll actually start by picking on, for reasons of context, a couple of comments that were made this morning. I think a young lady across somewhere in that area this morning in raising a question with respect
to tourism as well. In the insurance sector, in the yachting sector, we have these mega yachts that come to Antigua. So putting the technology to work in these key specific areas is really one part of the discussion. The other part is for government to create this, what I call totally enabling environment, Ronald, so that to allow this region has an opportunity to showcase that it has the men and the women and the means to utilize the technology to propel ourselves forward. I said in 2005 at a Canto conference in Barbados that technology is a great passport for this region to developed country status. We have to understand that the world is a harsh world, and we have an obligation to leverage on this technology in the simplest and in the most profound ways to propel things forward. Now, I said I wouldn't be long, Ronald, because I want to have a dialogue with my colleagues on the stage with you and with the audience. But if we are to examine the deployment of technology and benchmark its impact on social issues and on economic issues, I would say that technology in this era is perhaps the single most powerful tool that any government, any society, any NGO group, any church has. And when I say technology, I'm talking about affordable connectivity, reliable connectivity, broadband connectivity, putting it to work for government in the education system, putting it to work where it impacts most. I will put this brief remark, Ronald. When we examine the deployment of technology in the transportation sector, I'm not talking about the aviation sector, about people being able to catch a bus or to find out when is the next bus available and being able to transact that online. When we look at the banks, we shouldn't be in the bank spending hours or even half an hour or even 10 minutes to undertake a very simple transaction. Governments, certainly our government with the leadership of the Honorable Prime Minister Baldwin Spencer, we've been able to open up the environment, make it truly competitive, and understand that the rate of emergence of mobile technologies and 4G enabled handsets, that is so precipitous. We have to act and to act now. Those are my very brief remarks. I look forward to participating in your discussion, and thank you to iGovTT and to Atiba for inviting me. I love Trinidad and Tobago. If I didn't attend this World Bank Forum, I think my boss would have had an issue, and I had to stay put. But thank you for enabling me to participate.
Thank you very much.
Both area and population. The population is estimated at about 50,000. The capital city and headquarters of the government of the federal state is on the larger island of St. Kitts which is approximately 68 square miles. The island of Nevis lies about 2 miles southeast of St. Kitts and across a shallow called the Narrows. After about 365 years of sugar industry, we have diversified our economy, diversified the agricultural sector, tourism, exported-oriented manufacturing, and offshore banking sectors are being developed since 2005 and are now playing larger roles in the country's economy. The growth of tourism sector has become the main foreign exchange earner of St. Kitts and Nevis. The country has also developed one of the largest electronics assembly industry in the Caribbean. Economic reconstruction, specifically diversification of the output base of productive sector, has been a long-term development strategy of St. Kitts and Nevis and is the cornerstone of the entire development program. We have developed national plans and policies in place to promote ICT-enabled development. Information communication technology has been strategically chosen by the government of St. Kitts and Nevis as one of the pertinent enabling elements and sectors necessary for our vision of diversification and economic integration. ICT has been highlighted in the social policies and priorities which include the annual budget address, the new EU sugar regime adaptation strategy, and is regarded as an important element in the pursuit of country's diversification agenda. Electronic transaction, and I'm speaking about the National ICT Plan of 2006, trade in services, efficient e-government services, ICT capacity building are vital for modernization or modernizing the sector, the service sector of the economy. The progress that has been made towards the development of St. Kitts and Nevis as an information society substantially includes the preparation of the National ICT Strategic Plan of 2000.
Much with what's happening in the world and in the Americas, just not to lose the focus on what we want within the Caribbean. So that's why the Connect the Caribbean initiative is an initiative that came from the Connect the World initiative of the ITU. A spin-off of the Connect the Caribbean initiative is the Broadband Infrastructure and Public Awareness Caribbean project that is being developed by Canto, IDB, and at least 8 Caribbean governments. Okay, the synergy between these two, between these three, is that the IDB has decided that they want to assist the Caribbean and Latin America with technical assistance to develop or accelerate the growth of broadband. Canto had the same idea, and the Caribbean government were in the process of developing their ICT plan, and broadband played an important role in that. So there was synergy between the three organizations or agency, and we decided to do this project together. Canto is now the implementing agency of the project. The IDB funds it, and the whole Caribbean will benefit from it. The studies or the initiatives will be undertaken in 8 of the Caribbean countries, but everybody can participate, come up with ideas, attend the meetings, use the studies in your country, etc. Well, the Broadband Forum took place in Miami last year, and we had about 75 people present there, and we had government ministers, regulators, suppliers, and we agree that there is not enough information to accelerate the development of broadband. In particular, the governments found that they don't know what the different countries have, how the things are working, prices, etc. So we have to do a study so that they are informed of what's happening in the Caribbean before they decide on taking measures to accelerate it. So that was the outcome of the forum, and the countries that I mentioned in which the studies will be taken place are the 8 there. There are 9. The Bahamas is at this moment not a committed country because they were too late to send their commitment in. They had to commit to at least a certain amount of money in kind contribution, but all the other countries, Barbados, Belize, Dominica, Guyana, Haiti, Jamaica, Suriname, and Trinidad and Tobago will be actively involved in the study.
Agencies to look at ICT in particular. I think the minister just mentioned that in St. Kitts they're putting together a formalized office for that separately. So there are some things that have been done in the region that have then been replicated. Whether or not that's been done in any structured fashion or so is another story. But indeed there have been replications of what we consider best practice.
Okay, I think I'm seeing some questions, but I just wanted to give Minister Mansour the opportunity to comment if he had a perspective on whether we have done it well, have done it at all, in terms of leveraging what other territories may have done well.
Well, thank you very much, Ronald. I want to say that there are some projects that have had, pan-Caribbean uptake. The Canto has had a couple of projects. The Caribbean Telecoms Union has had 1 or 2. Some have had multi-stakeholder input, and by multi-stakeholder, I mean they have come from different regional organizations. Having said that, though, I want to say that governments have had to find a happy blend between their national priorities and what is happening on a pan-Caribbean basis. So the fact that this type of forum is taking place, and I can tell you there's been more ICT perspectives being shared in the last 24 months than in the last 5 or 6 years. So I think there is good room for optimism. There certainly is a lot more focus, even at a CARICOM heads of government level, on ICTs and so on. But to answer your question specifically, I would say yes, there have been some areas. Not necessarily every country has taken them up. Let me give you an example. We developed a piece of software here at the ministry that will help to optimize the management of daycare centers. What we did is we developed it, made it available to all the daycare centers in Antigua, gave free internet as well, but we also made it available for consumption by other countries in the Caribbean via the Caribbean Telecoms, via the International Telecoms Union. And I speak of the Caribbean Area Representative Cleveland Thomas. When we were at the Connect the Americas Summit earlier this year, I believe in June or July in Panama City, we as government signed an agreement with the ITU allowing them to use this software in any other CARICOM country. So that is just one example, Ronald.
Okay, that is very encouraging. Now, I saw some questions there, but I can't read them properly from...
So maybe I can help you. When you say broadband, does that include mobilist? I always say Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean. So igniting our own ICT spark for development is not something that is just going to be peculiar or specific to Trinidad and Tobago, but the entire region, and really recognizing the power of our diasporas. We're all over the globe in very significant numbers as well. So let's take a quick coffee break. Don't daddle too much because we want to get back on time so that we can go into the next session on time. Thank you very much.